production
The worst
issues.
show on the internet. By the way, I am an Emmy award-winning producer. Hello. Welcome to Making the Rounds. It is the internet going down is not my fault, but that issue with Emily not being heard was totally my fault because I didn't realize muting OBS meant that OBS would not pick up desktop audio, and I muted it for various reasons that I will not discuss at this moment. But it is unmuted now, and you can hear Emily talk about KT Rolster in real
Yeah.
time. Well, not real time, like
Oh,
6 hours
God.
later. But anyway, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, they sure did the thing. I think
That's the
so.
worst tweet I
The funniest timeline is still available, where it's like KT are just the team that keeps stopping Gen G from having an undefeated like season in series,
Mm-hmm.
and then they miss playoffs because that timeline is still possible, and it would also be the most KT thing ever, right? To stop like this team that by all accounts is looking to be a favorite at Worlds, is looking to like most likely win the LCK this summer, and then go as LCK first seed to Worlds and probably win it, and potentially complete the Golden Road, and then KT like stop them from having their undefeated season. It's actually unreal. This team is so stupid. Oh God. Where do I even start? I don't know. So like I'll say some of it is on KT just for whatever reason playing much more solidly against their tougher opponents than they do against Bro and Pongdong Freaks. Part of it is also some of the stuff compositionally. I think you could even see in Gen G's series against T1, which I'm sure we'll talk about following. They like, especially in their first game of that series, the T1 series, not the series tonight. They essentially had a composition that was going to just scale and win out, and they chose to fight at several times when they didn't have to, and like either didn't have itemization or their champs were not online, and T1's comp was in a much better position. And so they kept losing those fights, and then eventually, as the game wore on, they got more opportunities to get back into it. Today, I think you could see some other sloppy play from them where they weren't playing to their composition, or for some reason Pioshik was getting the best of Canyon, which is confusing. And then additionally, I think especially in game 3, even when KT did not ward their flanks for the Kennen, there was a play at about like 39 minutes, I think, in game 3, where basically the last gasp that Genji can do is to TP the Kennen behind, and even though they do not see it, they end up being able to decimate him anyway because their comp has the tools to deal with it. I also did like the Smolder mid response. For a lot of reasons, the like Smolder in general received small buffs on, I lose track of patches, honestly. Was it this past patch or the patch before? Was it 14? Well, they're on 14-15. I just forget whether the Smolder buffs came through on 14-15 or 14-14. 14-14. Okay, yeah, I thought it wasn't. Yeah, I thought it wasn't the latest patch. But the more important thing is his itemization, it was not as affected as other AD carries because he wasn't affected by like the Kraken Slayer and LDR nerfs. So, yeah, I think like this particular double AD composition with the Ash getting through for barrel and then obviously set up from the Maokai was really good. I liked the Smolder mid response. I think that in general, one of the big things we talked about with KT looking pretty rough, and even in their games against Kwangdong and Bro when they looked pretty rough, it did look like sometimes they were not comfortable pulling off double AD comps or playing AD mids. But I think Smolder in particular is the type of champion that BDD will do pretty well on, not only because I'm not saying BDD can't play AD mids, but he's typically more comfortable with casters and with mages, and that's been a problem for KT like all year, because he is like when they win, it's typically because he is having a really stellar performance. I'd say currently on this team, he is the one with the most carry potential, and I really liked the Smolder in Game 3. I thought it was clever. I thought it suited him really well. I think putting Pioshik on Maokai is great. He probably doesn't want to hear that, but I think it's a good idea. And yeah, I think it got to, especially in Game 3, I think it got to a point where this comp is just going to have easier setup and scale really well. So congrats to KT. I still think Gen G are, again, some small things in their play. Like I said, the T1 series where they were picking fights and they probably shouldn't have, and small things like that they should probably look to shore up. But I also, even with this KT win, like series win, still like heavily favored Gen G to win LCK. So I don't think it like changes much in the grand scheme of things, except for the fact that it's fucking hilarious that this stupid KT team has stood in their way twice now. It's just insane.
Okay, so because I have some insight as to how this goes.
Oh god. Okay.
I can easily solve the KT mystery for you, okay?
All right, what is it?
Let's say you're a top team like Gen G, okay? And you're looking at your opponents and you're like, all right, we're going to have to do some match prep. We're going to have to do some let's like take a look at the schedule and really try to figure out who our strongest opponents are and what we're getting down in. Like, we have to do some fan engagement, we have to do all these things, we have limited scrim time. Let's see, who are we playing this week? All right, we're playing DRX and KT. Well, let's see. I mean, KT just lost to KDF and Bro. So, like, honestly, I mean, we can afford to slack a bit prepping for them. I mean, DRX beat Bro, so like they're clearly the more difficult opponent, and our scrim prep. So clearly, you know, we can afford to spend a little bit of extra scrim time on DRX and preparing comps specifically for DRX and thinking about how we're going to play and draft against DRX than this team that's on 2 series loss streaks. You know, to shit teams because they're obviously just bad and not worth our time. This is obviously an excessive dramatization, but you know, it's potentially.
I feel like I'm right there in the coach's booth now. I feel like I'm right there. You really put me in the scene.
Yeah, you really understand like the thought processes now. Unironically, I've had conversations that approximate that in the past, and it's definitely led to losing to teams that you shouldn't lose to. But I'm not saying this always happens with KT. Especially since they have a tendency to beat Genji, right? Historically.
Yeah.
I do think the way you pointed out the Smolder was good. I think Smolder is kind of like, when I saw BDD picking it, I was thinking to myself, if you think about it, Smolder is just like a worse Zoe. So, realistically speaking, it should be good for him.
It should suit him way better than Lucian. I mean, I don't disagree with that assessment, actually.
But I am surprised because usually my analysis of KT is that they're kind of reliant on having Prio mid, to kind of let Pureshik do whatever, and it seemed to work out. That's why I also actually like the Draven from Jovi, because it's like, yeah, we're just gonna run at you and beat the shit out of you. Though who is better Draven, Insanity or Chovy? Who wore it better?
Who wore
it better? We need that to be the fashion corner segment where we just have Chovy Draven and Insanity Draven, and we'll have to do like a fashion runway review. Yeah. That'll be that's the secret. All right, we've got the concept for next episode. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, I do think KT, like, they have a lot of players who will, like, Genji is kind of susceptible to kind of like scrappy early game, but you need to be competent enough at mid game to close, right? You need to be competent enough at mid game that your map making is good, or that your map control is good enough that you cannot get completely run around the map by them. And I think KT, like, even at their worst, their experience and their mid game macro is not bad. Like, I don't ever watch KT games and think, damn, like, this team has absolute dog shit, unredeemable macros. So I actually think they have like a decent matchup against Genji fundamentally. It's just that their early game is like a little weird sometimes. And against Genji, that doesn't really matter because Genji act like the game doesn't begin until 20 minutes anyway. So it's fine. Yeah. But I'm still saying KT make worlds. You're still not a KT fan.
I am not a KT believer. Let's just say.
I'm not a KT
Again,
believer.
the funniest timeline is still available, which is that they missed playoffs. Still possible.
Yep, it's still possible. But I'm just saying, we're catching up to T1 here. It's happening. In the standings.
It is, because T1 lost 0-2 to Nongshim Red Force.
Which I think neither of us have watched that series.
Yeah, I did nap through it, so I will... Sorry, guys. I have not been feeling all that great this week, and I will review it later today. But yeah.
I watched like bits of, again, because my internet was terrible, so I watched bits of KT on the KT Genji series on my phone, but was not willing to experience an ST1. It deserves more reverence, really, than a KT series. No, honestly, KT TES World Finals, that's my perfect timeline right there.
That'd be the most cursed shit.
It would be the best. I'm sorry. You've been vetoed.
What kind of crazy stuff has to happen for that timeline to actually work out?
I mean, they both have to make worlds at step 1.
They both have to make worlds, and then KT would have to be the Genji killers.
Oh yeah,
right? Like,
they would have to be like face
Genji in the bracket stage.
Which honestly is not unrealistic, because you very frequently, because of the format, do get regional matchups. So
yeah,
not that unrealistic. It could happen.
That timeline is available as well.
Yep.
There are so many timelines available to us.
But in how many of them do we win? Doctor
I feel
Strange.
like we win in a lot of them, to be honest.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Doctor
There are a lot
Strange.
of entertaining possibilities.
I must have missed that part of Infinity War. It's like, I've seen so many timelines, and in most of them we win. Okay. That's how that
I mean,
scene goes.
I win when things are entertaining.
Exactly. All right. But we kind of flubbed the transition to talking about T1, which was on the agenda. We wanted to specifically talk about Faker, which I don't have anything original to say about the Faker beating his head against the wall, other than the fact that I have done that myself many times when frustrated. So, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I was gonna like start this with the caveat that like, why I'm not even giving a thumbs up.
Emily
Discord,
approves of
why?
Faker hitting his head against the
No.
wall. All right.
So like there are a few things for me, and like the first thing, the preamble to it is that this is gonna sound really weird, like a really weird lead into this, but like one of the drawbacks, potentially the only drawback to having empathy for other people, is that you can only experience, and I'm actually being serious, you can only experience things through the window of your own experiences, right? So like I can look at something like this myself, and like I obviously cannot begin to comprehend the pressure that Faker is under as a player. And I cannot begin to comprehend like the position he's in as the face of LOL esports, the face of, and by extension, like the face of LOL esports in his entire country, the most popular player in the world, the greatest of all time that our sport is probably going to see. And again, the amount of pressure, like I cannot fathom that. But what I personally can understand with that caveat about just how empathy works is being so frustrated that you do something like this. I think people probably underestimate this facet of my personality, but like I'm a very, very competitive person. It actively frustrates me when I'm not the best at something, which is why you hear me on this show and publicly and all this stuff, be, like, incredibly self-critical, like, even with less experience than a lot of my peers, it infuriates me personally, and I'm mad at myself, not anyone else, but it infuriates me that I am not the best in my field. That's actively frustrating me, and something that frustrates me a lot. Um, and I have at times, like, been so frustrated. Usually I don't bang my head, but I have definitely like punched walls in my life, to the point where I've like bruised my knuckles across and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, it's just a in a moment thing. It happens a lot in traditional sports. And we don't see it as much in esports unless someone is like raging on stream, usually about, like, solo queue games. We don't really see it as much in gaming, or at least in LOL esports specifically, as much as I see it in, like, traditional sports, right? Like, traditional sports have, like, highlight reels of, for example, like, not even players, but, like, baseball managers getting kicked out when they, like, take all the bases off the field, and they're, like, screaming in umpires' faces, and they're, like, kicking dirt, or they're, punching things in the dugout, and that to me is a very, like, relatable reaction of frustration. Um, was it last week at this point? Our schedule has been so weird. I don't remember whether it was last week or 2 weeks ago, but I went through, probably still in my notebook, I went through, like, their entire schedule, right? Where it's like
Yeah,
their
you
schedule
did.
for just the past 2 weeks has been, or 2 weeks, 2 years. Um, it goes back further than that, but, like,
Yeah.
I just ticked off the 2 years, has been, like, absolutely insane, right? And when we were kind of trying to diagnose, like, okay, what's wrong with T1, um, some of it for me as again, as a complete outsider with the caveat that I put at the beginning is just like burnout and frustration with that. And that's also hard to deal with as a competitive person because, again, and this has happened to me when someone's like there was one time when I have been a broadcaster, um, where I was scheduled for a certain amount of days, and then someone realized that I was working like every single day, and they took away days, and I immediately messaged someone and I was like, "What did I do wrong? Why did you take me off these days?" And they were like, "We just want you to be able to like sleep." And I was like, "No, like I must have done something wrong. What did you do? Why did you do this?" So in a lot of those situations, pulling someone is also like more damaging. So it's tricky. It's also something that it is unfortunate that it got caught on camera because it's just kind of a, I don't know, a private visceral moment that then got blown up to like a very, very large scale. Um so yeah, I feel like that doesn't add anything original probably in a very rambly way, but I also haven't seen I also haven't seen the matches from this past night because obviously they did lose 0-2 to Nongshim, so it things just must be really frustrating right now, and that's unfortunate because as you and I've talked about multiple times on the show, we both respect the hell out of Faker, and in particular like his longevity and the fact that he was just this past spring having like a massive career resurgence in terms of like his actual gameplay, which is kind of insane if you think about how long he's been playing. So it sucks to see him go through this like downturn in terms of his individual play, and then the obvious frustration on the team because they are T1 and they are expected to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the biggest thing, I mean, I kind of need, it's like I've done that. I've literally banged my head against the wall because I've been so frustrated, and I don't have like the same level of pressure, especially not currently. But I'll bang my head against the wall over, why did I say have a good flight when I'm saying goodbye to someone? You know, like just stupid shit like
I've
that.
done that, yeah.
I just get so cringe and frustrated that I have to take out my like frustration in some way. Obviously that's an extreme example, but I definitely it's something that happens, right? And that's probably why like in the first, when he first bangs his head against the wall, his teammates like, okay, but then he just like keeps doing it and someone pulls him off the wall. So like that's like a particularly frustrating moment, right? Especially because how many times do they play against Gen G? Like they expect themselves to be the best. And again, I think your point about empathy, it's original and good because, well, it's not original, but it's not something I hear enough. Let's put it that way. Which is that like we can't actually relate to his experience. Yeah. We can't actually do that. I can say that, you know, I've experienced a level of frustration that would cause me to bang my head against the wall, but I can't like fully understand because he's got a lot of pressure, right? I remember the photo from Worlds last year. Was it last year? No, it was the year before, right? With the DRX series. When it was like Carrier breaking down and he was like being very stoic because he's also the experienced person on the team. When you are the leader, you also have pressure to not show your frustrations, to not like publicly show off, to be strong for the people who are kind of like looking up to you on your team. So I think that that's definitely also something that's like makes that particular moment particularly shocking. Is that he is expressing that level of frustration. He obviously assumed the cameras were not on him, and they weren't. It was just a fan in the crowd, right? So it's just one of those things where, like it's very difficult to, like I'm not gonna say he shouldn't play because it's not my job to analyze that, right? And I'm not going to say that, like. But I'm also going to say that particular level of frustration is not something that we as fans and spectators if anything, he should have been more frustrated by now, if that makes sense. Like, he should have expressed some level of frustration before. But I obviously can't diagnose whether or not he should play, but I'm saying, like, fans who feel that they can, I mean, they have some level of insight I clearly do not, so. Or they're talking out of their ass, one of those. So, yeah, it's definitely, and it's obviously it's frustrating. I will not be surprised if I've kind of memed about it, but I really will not be surprised if T1 don't make Worlds this year. Like, I genuinely won't. I think they're having a really hard time, and when you watch them play, like, we can move on to gameplay. I'd love to hear your perspective on this too, Emily, because when I watch their games, it feels like, and I remember the quote he gave at MSI, which was their team is, like, very focused on early game, and that's why lane swaps were bad for them. It feels like if they're not significantly ahead by a certain amount of time, they start making really bad decisions around fights and map setups that are just uncharacteristic. It's almost like they're rushed. Like, oh, we don't have a significant lead, we're gonna lose. Like, that's kind of how it feels sometimes. So I'd be very curious to hear your perspective on kind of what's going wrong with them gameplay wise.
So I don't disagree with that. That in particular is like a slightly more recent development, which is sad because if you think of how they, for example, won Worlds last year, it was the inverse, right? Where like they could get a good team fight off somehow. Even when they were in a disadvantageous position, they could take advantage of their opponent's mispositioning. And it wouldn't even necessarily be around neutral objective setups. It would just be around the enemy team either being out of position or like they were getting their own vision down to try to close out the game, and T1 would be able to capitalize with a really good flank or just a better like arrangement of players on the map to be able to punish people out of position. But in terms of like when I think of okay, what is and I'm going to use something that I use a lot, but like what is the platonic ideal of this like iteration of T1? It is definitely, I know you're laughing because I said that on cast too, but it's definitely where they are finding a way to not just have like a really strong early game, but in particular, really, really smash lane. And even getting like honing in further on it, their 2v2 bot lane was such a massive part of this team's success over the past 2 years, bringing out these kind of really creative, pushing bot lanes. It was one of the reasons why, for example, I favored them over DRX, despite Beryl also bringing out some of those similar picks in 2022. Because I thought this is a roster where, or this is a meta where this particular roster thrives, especially with pushing 2v2 bot lane. And I think the interesting thing that's happening now is they looked way better in spring, and the meta shifts that happened, like we have talked about here, where they somehow like favored Gen G even more when Gen G already looked good. And it's like, oh, here's double AD comps, and Gen G are like, we'll take that. That sounds great. Whereas T1 have been a lot more awkward in this meta. And not just because of double AD compositions, but I think even though Owner, I'd cite as like one of their players, again, have not seen today's Nongshim series, so maybe he looked really rough today, but in summer has been one of the players who's been playing like well despite the team struggles in my opinion. And that's really interesting because previously a lot of it, to your point, was when they push up on the map, it just gives him way more coverage, right? And I think we've talked about them similarly to KT, where they haven't looked nearly as comfortable in double AD comps as they did with the Azir meta. We have talked about how, or you already brought up, but in terms of their setups, they've looked a lot worse in terms of being able to respond to lane swap situations. I thought they did evolve at MSI and came up with some interesting responses, especially in the G2 series, and then found themselves stymied later on. But yeah, this is not a team that I think has ever been, even with those adaptations that they made at MSI, and you could see them like actively working on it. That's not going to be their comfort, right? Like lane swaps are not going to be their comfort. This is a team that really, really wants to smash you in all three lanes and play very far forward, very early. And that is still, in my opinion, how, like, when I think of this T1 team at their best, that is how they are playing. And so yeah, meta shifts and like compounding frustration. I think in general also, to loop back around to just the expectations for a T1 team and how this team is like very much expected to win, is that this is what how many times in a row have they lost to Genji now? Is it like 10? It's 10, right? I think.
I don't know. I keep thinking that they beat they get the occasional Genji win, or they did last year, but it feels like this year it's not happening, right?
Yeah, if it only feels like the distance between like where Genji are and T1 are is widening. That also has to be really, really, really frustrating. And this roster has been together for a while. So hopefully that also means that they can mitigate conflict internally, but because they have been together for so long, that can either be easier or more difficult depending on team environment. And I do think T1 absolutely has the resources to be able to help with that. But yeah, meta-wise, that's kind of my diagnosis of them, is that even if they win in this meta, it is never going to look as good or be as comfortable for them as previously when we were pushing lanes, when we were in a more Azir focused mid lane situation. And who knows, that might be coming back on 14-16. Got some mage buffs coming in. So they're really, really trying to break us out of double 80 carry before Worlds, I think. So I still see T1 making Worlds for the same reasons. And again, caveat is I've not seen the Nongshim series. I don't know how bad it was. But I think that the other thing is when you look at the rest of the LCK once again, basically Fear X would have to somehow, like, it's really close because it's 8-7, 8-8, 7-8, 7-8 in series for T1, then KT, then KDF, then Fear X. Let me look at their schedule now. Because T1 actually face Bro, KDF, and Fear X. So it's an important schedule. For a team of this caliber, it shouldn't be a tough one, but they're just coming off an 0-2 loss to Nongshim. So it's possible. It's still very difficult for me to see them missing playoffs and missing Worlds. I still think they will go as, like, I still firmly believe that the 4 teams attending Worlds for LCK will be Genji, HLE, DK, and T1.
I mean, I think they'll make playoffs, right? It's really hard, I think, for them to miss playoffs at this point.
Yeah.
But you know, it's the KT nipping at their heels. Also,
yeah,
what I got from that conversation is that the reason why Baker was banging his head against the wall is he's trying to escape the cave. Anyway, with that, we're going to move on. What? What's up?
How many people are going to get that?
I don't know if they remember that you referenced the Platonic ideal.
Yeah, at the very beginning.
There you go.
Go back to middle school humanities.
Nice. But yeah, I'm gonna push us forward a bit and talk about regions that are not regions that I slept through this morning. AKA LCS, though arguably many people would think I should sleep through these. And in the past, I have. See, I'm making Emily tired just bringing up the LCS. But a lot of people still want to talk about Shopify. And it's interesting because you mentioned that my viewers had previously wanted to talk about Shopify and that you were on Hotline League and people wanted to talk about Shopify. But I looked...
All I wanted to talk about was Shopify. Yeah.
I did look up like the main instigator in both cases seems to be Cloud Sidkey, so shout out to Cloud Sidkey. The current ringleader of the Shopify, and I saw that Shibi did the thing with him and Daniel. I'm always mispronounce his name, so I'm not even gonna try. The 100 Thieves fan. Yeah. And one of them has to do the bye 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 dance for the team that doesn't make playoffs. So good.
Not see that, but all the best to them.
Yeah, good luck to them. Anyway, fun stuff. Shopify. I guess like my question is, what do you feel like the overall sentiment on Hotline League was about Shopify, generally speaking?
So like in terms of what I could glean for community sentiment, because again, I'm just going based off of two things actually. One was the Hotline League like chat and callers and like takes, but then the other was the atmosphere in the arena when Shopify were playing FlyQuest, which by the way was heavily Shopify favored. And a lot of this probably has to do more with like when Shopify win, they're a very fun team usually, right? Like they will lock in some really creative picks. I think people appreciate how forward Boogie plays and also how much he interacts with his lanes, which I think is always more interesting for people because it typically means more early skirmishes, more early dives, and potentially more early kills. But the crowd was so heavily Shopify focused. Like they were really, really, really rooting for them to beat FlyQuest. And you could argue that there was a world where Shopify 2-0'd this series. So I think the big narrative push for me in terms of my head and like, oh, everyone always wants to talk about Shopify is that all anyone wants to talk about post NRG Shopify series was Shopify. But then B, it seems like compared to a lot of the other bottom teams in LCS, because unfortunately we only have a single round robin, it makes it difficult to talk about a lot of things. But the LCS is also really stratified in terms of like TL C9 at the top, FlyQuest very solidly in third, and then the rest of the teams kind of scrambling. And I think with Boogie coming back, people are like, oh, this Shopify team is like super interesting now to us. Like they look better than in terms of momentum. They look better than NRG. They look better than a team like oh my god, who was I just thinking of? 100 Thieves, who they face this coming week. And so people would prefer that Shopify make playoffs because, and again, this is the sentiment I got. I don't know if this is true. I don't even know if this is widespread or if it's like two people in Travis' chat. But they would prefer that Shopify win because they are in a place of more forward momentum at the time, kind of similar to how like, and I agree with what I'm about to say, that Carmine Core looked better than some of the teams that ended up making it to season finals. They looked like they were on an upswing. They looked like they had figured out at the very least like mid jungle synergy and had like forward momentum. And I feel like Shopify are in kind of a similar situation right now where people will be disappointed if they don't make playoffs because of this kind of late season revitalization with Boogie coming back in.
I mean, it's like, I'm sure we'll get to the 100 Thieves matchup since that's basically the decider. And we already kind of briefly talked about it occurring. But the thing for me that's interesting from Shopify's perspective is their mid game is still like the worst in the league. It's still really terrible. Like, yes, they are making like a lot of it you can attribute to Boogie, and I feel like my initial analysis of the change was like pretty close. Is that they're not going to necessarily improve that much, but you'll get like cheese wins off of the fact that Boogie understands that he has to like skip and put himself behind quite a bit in many cases to kind of in guarantee lane leads. Because lanes are somewhat struggling without, and I see a lot of ganks that Boogie does where it's still just like very frustrating to watch, especially in the Fly series, where it's like, I cannot believe that worked. That is crazy. But it's also fun, right? Like, everyone loves when fun things happen and people have fun. I also think an underrated element of people's Shopify fandom is that a lot of the core is like from DSG. And I think a lot of people want to see the ideal of like an underdog team getting promoted, making it in, and succeeding, and that's like close. It's like as close as we can come to it, kind of, because it's like Zazel and Fake God and Tomio briefly, right? So it's like there is that element of it. I don't know exactly how much people care about that, and it's just me coping. But I think the part of the reason why people like DSG in the first place was a very similar reasoning, which is like the drafts, which was like double tank when they were in academy, and then a little bit here, and then also Insanity's always been known for like 80 mids. I remember he played Sivir mid in academy. And he played Lucian last year. He's played like a lot of. He's always played like a lot of 80 mids. Or Kaisa mid was something he played a lot too. He's always played like been willing to branch out specifically into the 80 mids, but he's always been kind of willing to branch out into everything. And a lot of the times he gets advantages off of the fact that he's just trying things that people are unfamiliar with, right? He doesn't even necessarily play those laning phases or those champions ideally. It's just like he's willing to invest enough games into the champion to get it competent enough that it will throw people off, right? That's kind of like been Insanity's style and MO his entire career. So that's like a very easy thing to root for. So it's like a combination of those things. For me, like, again, I think they're kind of still the same team, but they're getting easy wins off of like ganks and snowballs. I think the Ashe was huge in the Fly series as well. I think Ashe is something that NA teams still don't know how to play against, and frequently results in a free win, just because the lane discrepancies will just be so massive. I'm also very like that's another reason why the laning matchup, why the 100 Thieves matchup is very interesting to me, because I think Tomo is one of the better laning ADs in North America right now in general. That was like his big selling point and why I had him on my all pro list in spring as well. And then also why DSG now have been doing so well, because he was previously on DSG. He's been a big factor there. So I'm very interested to see that, because I think part of the reason why they've been able to get these leads is just either like laning differential and weird ganks in the early game, because their mid game is still like not on the level. Like you will see, like the best example was actually that FlyQuest series where Fake God had like 7 kills and was even in gold more or less with the Renekton, because of the fact that Bwipo was just constantly pushing outside lanes. And they would frequently be in, like, there was one position where I think FlyQuest were, even in the game they lost, like FlyQuest were heavily behind, but they were still making even map trades and towers until Busio and Masu got caught mid, and then like the game kind of exploded. But they were really behind at that point, and they were still making even or advantageous map trades with Shopify, which is very interesting. So for me, it's like I still am kind of a doubter, and I think that the 100 Thieves matchups just got a buff slightly. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm always excited to see Big God doing well. He's my boy. I'll defend him against the haters all the time. So.
Tricky thing is, just mathematically, they have to 2-0 to make it, which is really tough, right? Regardless of what happens in the TL NRG series, which is the only other thing that matters, because there also can be a world where there's a 3-way tie, and then we play like a bracket to see who gets that final spot. But all of those scenarios rely on Shopify 2-0ing. Like, they cannot drop a game. And provided NRG, like conversely, if NRG win a game, they also qualify, even if they lose to TL. But the other thing I will say about the Shopify FlyQuest series, I don't know how much you want to talk about FlyQuest, is that they got a lot of early momentum off of 2v2 laning mistakes from Busio and Masu, which was frustrating to see, only because I thought Busio and Masu had actually performed up until this point really well as a duo lane. I thought they had shored up a lot of their laning weaknesses that we saw from them in spring, where they would make mistakes like this and they would die in the 2v2. In particular, they were actually just coming off of a really great series where Masu absolutely stomped on Callista, and they really heavily prioritized inspired pathing down to add to the fact that they just had this insanely strong Callista lane. And so to see them play, like, to see them be so like mistake prone against Shopify bot lane was really frustrating, only because it seemed like a slight step back from what has been like a steady improvement for this bot lane throughout summer. So that's another thing I wanted to point out in their most recent win, because I feel like a lot of people are looking at FlyQuest and being like, well, this also means that FlyQuest are super, super fraudulent and they look terrible and they need Inspired to drag them over the finish line. And I do think when compared to TL and C9, especially the TL C9 series we saw this past week, FlyQuest are definitely below those two teams right now, in my estimation. But I also think that FlyQuest bot lane in this Shopify series had a particularly rough and mistake-prone laning phase, and Shopify were able to capitalize on that. And in only one of those games did it end up in a win, because to your point, their mid-game is really, really rough, and they make a lot of mistakes that end up giving up any early leads that they have, either through just general map play, where you'll notice that the enemy team, despite Shopify's small laning victories, is even in gold, or has a better setup on a neutral objective, like they're first to the objective, or they have better vision and stuff like that. And yeah, so I think that people are somewhat overreacting and calling FlyQuest really, really bad after the series. But I also think part of it is just perception because of the TL C9 series and the fact that FlyQuest series against Shopify was so much sloppier, even though they did win 2-1.
And I mean, I think the thing about Masu and Busio all year has been that they're kind of an explosive bot lane. And this is very typical among like less experienced players, where they are more willing to go for like the bloodthirsty play, but they're also maybe less aware of jungle presence or not thinking about every single step before they do something, which is also why like more experienced bot lanes will tend to be more risk averse. I've been watching a lot of Night Preview games lately, and it's very interesting because I would swear he's just become an extremely risk averse laner. Like he will go for like extra points and sustain based spells, or he will not take trades that are extremely free. That he would have taken like 3 years ago. So I think that that's like a super good example because right now Knight is like just really playing for stability in lane a great deal compared to like what we think of his reputation, which is like I'm gonna jump on this guy's face and get him to half HP and just put myself really forward on the map. So it's like an over time thing where players tend to go from like being more explosive, being more willing to take a lot of trades when they're young and they're not thinking as much about a lot of different variables like jungle pressure and what does it do to the game for the rest of my team if I'm 0-3 at 10 minutes, whatever the case may be, right? And so you'll get like the really insane snowball performances from them, but you'll also get the, oh, we just lost first tower to Shopify at like 11 minutes. That's sick. So yeah, really fun. But it's also why I think, again, 100 Thieves kind of will match up well against them. So I think that's one thing 100 Thieves have been lacking a lot is like lane stability, and I think Tomo brings you a lot more laning power and parity, at least in bots. So we'll see how the rest of it goes. Maybe if God has like another insane performance on Nar or something like that, and top goes down really, really bad. You know, it's kind of exciting. You know, the 2018 Academy top laner versus the new hotness, like the first in the line of like the hot Academy top laners to now. You know, it's clearly a narrative only I care about. Anyway, we.
I will say that's not one of the narratives we are workshopping.
Probably not, but I mean, I remember when like Fake God was coming up in 2019. He was like the new hotness, and now it's like very, I mean, yeah.
I remember him even in Scouting Grounds where people are like, "Whoa, like he's really, really, really good," and kind of coming out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that was end of 2018 into like the start of 2019. So yeah, good times. Yeah, again, not a narrative I'm sure anyone but me cares about, but we will.
I will say, as a last point, because I know we're not going to talk about 100 Thieves as much, but in terms of their matchup to Shopify, I do think I liked what Tomo brought to the team. Mm-hmm. I agree that his laning is going to be like, he just has more laning prowess, but then also it should be stable and it should be something that if River wants to play around, that was kind of Dig last split was XU always pathing down towards bot to get bot lane ahead or to help capitalize on whatever laning leads or potential dives that Tomo and Isles had set up. And it adds another facet to 100 Thieves that I think is interesting. I also am not sure how much it can help in the long run because this team has still, in my opinion, always looked best when they've played around their solo laners, and also River can have early impact, which is interesting going up against Boogie because I think both of them are more than willing to, even with increased jungle XP, skip camps in order to help their lanes. But River, in my opinion, is just so much more efficient about it, and is more aware of where he should be on the map. But so it adds an interesting facet to this team, and I'm not sure if they will be able to play around or if they're like essentially if their solo laners can play in that kind of environment when the team itself has not really played that way the entirety of the year. But it's an interesting matchup into Shopify. I trust neither of these teams mid-game, so I have a feeling it's probably going to go to 3 games, which is bad news for Shopify enjoyers because, like I said, they need to 2-0 in order to qualify for playoffs, but we'll see.
And you kind of pointed out why I favor 100 Thieves, which is it feels like 100 Thieves are kind of one of those anything you can do, I can do better sort of skits. Like it's not like they're insanely better than Shopify, but the things that Shopify are good at, they're also good at and arguably better at. So that's kind of where I am. I agree with you. It'll probably go to 3 though, so that'll be fun. Yeah, so we will move on to talk about why do no mid-game teams exist? Because it's TS. Someone did ask about, actually, before we move on, is Shopify leaving LCS? And Emily has said she doesn't really want to speculate on it, but I will speculate away. Hooray! I think Shopify will stay. I think that many people have pointed out that it's an economically sound decision for them to leave because they basically bought in very cheaply and then get a payout for existing for a year. But I also think that they actually just genuinely do bought into LCS because they thought it was a good investment and wants to be here for a while. So yeah, I think they'll stick around. They're not on my list of teams that will leave. But yeah, the other question, yeah, we can save that one for the end because it was a YouTube question from the last VOD, and it's also not LCS specific. But we will move on to LEC. And the hot LEC topic right now is, should LEC be reduced to 8 teams because they're so shit that they don't deserve 10.
Confused because, again, I do not check Reddit, and I did not know that this is a hot topic until Kelsey was like, do you want to talk about this? And I was like, wait, yes, that's an interesting take that I don't agree with whatsoever. So you said, like, the way you typed it out was that because LCS has been more exciting with 8 teams. And spoilers, guys, we're going down to 6 teams next.
I can't contain my excitement. Even fewer teams.
Make it even more exciting with fewer jobs for all. Anyway, I think so LCS has been very entertaining this split. I will say that, or this year in general. But I also think, and the two of us touched upon narrative feedback loops in the last episode. We spent a lot of time on it. I think the most interesting thing in you typing out this take is that someone said it would be good for viewership, which is like just not true. And the fact that viewership is being brought into it is like really confusing to me because for those that don't know, LEC viewership like gaps LCS viewership by a pretty significant margin at this point. And I think one of the things that
who would have thought gappable thing is gapped anyway.
Yeah. One of the things that I was praising LEC for at the beginning of the split was actually doing a good job of playing into the regional rivalries that naturally come with having teams like MDK, having teams like Carmine Core, coming into the scene and having really, really big Spanish and French streamers attached to those teams and really playing into the regional rivalry. And that drives viewership. Like the fact that Carmine Core are not in season finals, if they were, viewership numbers would be even better than they're going to be, which I think even with people kind of expecting that it's still going to be G2 Fnatic at the end of it all, because we haven't seen anything that challenges that. in gameplay. I think that if Carmine Core were here, that would skyrocket viewership even more. And I already think that viewership is going to be pretty good for a summer like season final. So again, I would encourage people to divorce this idea that like good game, like the level of gameplay compared to international or like that kind of thing, it can help in terms of sentiment, but in terms of viewership, the thing that moves the needle more is having really, really strong team or player fan bases. And that is something that LEC kind of already has. And so eliminating, like, to loop back around, eliminating teams would be bad actually. Because it would mean that you would lose those fan bases. And now I assume the counterpoint that people would bring up is like, well, can't we just like slice off like a rogue and then like another team and not an MDK or like a Carmine Core? So I'm sure that is also part of the argument, but I would just say like I would divorce the viewership idea from like a lot of things, and one of them would be removing teams, because like removing teams did not help LCS viewership, guys.
But wait, I thought it was the greatest growth we've ever seen. Anyway,
like what? I can't even see how that would be an argument.
And I think I won't slam this take too much because I know it was like a firmly held Travis Gafford take, which was that like reducing 10 to 8 teams would allow the broadcast to focus on building storylines of the remaining teams really well and increase individual fan bases. I mean, to me, the reason why that take's ridiculous is because, like, even Miracu said in chat, let's just reduce it to 2 teams then. Then we can really enhance the player storylines. We'll only be talking about the same 10 players all
10
season.
10 players.
Very easy to story build. But I mean, I think it's like my answer to that is usually just get good. Like, it's not difficult to do storylines for 10 teams. Try doing storylines for 17 teams. That's fun. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I fall on it. Is it's like it is still like 10 teams is not that difficult to brand and differentiate. Like if you look at professional sports leagues, most of them have more, and then part of that is because they've been going for so long that it's very easy to build like local fan bases and all of these elements. I think we are now just now entering a phase where people are realizing, oh shit, we actually have to brand build and focus on other forms of revenue drivers other than just get good and make worlds and get sponsors that way, which has been the model for a very long time. And I could talk about this at length because there's actually a history of VC-backed businesses in the U.S. delaying actual sustainable revenue generation in fields with international equivalent. It's very common. And because the LAC pool was like very much connected to the LCS like funding model, you had Misfits, you had teams like that. You had a lot of teams trying to go to the LCS, looking for funding from like LCS-based businesses, etc. So, I mean, I think there's just like we're entering an era where story building is more important, and I think LEC already does a really good job of that in many cases, which is why their viewership, which we talked about last week, part of why their viewership has been so strong for a while, relatively, and everyone globally is declining in viewership, and that includes China, which I think we talked about last week. Either that or I talked about it with someone else in the intervening week. Anyway.
I feel like we definitely brought it up.
Yeah.
Maybe not, though. But that is true.
Yeah, so it's definitely just like a league kind of ecosystem thing, and to an extent, esports kind of ecosystem thing. though that again depends on the title. So for me, it's like bringing up viewership is very strange, but I think that's like the crux of the argument is that it would be more enjoyable to watch if we eliminate these shit teams, and it would increase the overall quality experience. I think. Okay, I'm going to defend BO1. All right, I don't even like BO1 that much, but I'm going to defend it. I think BO1 made LCS more fun to watch in spring because I've seen a lot more takes in summer about how it's more boring now because there's very clear top teams, very clear bottom teams, and we talked about this when BO3 was introduced, that would probably be a byproduct, which is that there's way fewer, oh my god, crazy upsets, oh my god, anyone can beat anyone, because you have best of threes, which requires like more repetition to demonstrate that you're clearly winning more games, right? Against the same team. So for me, I think it's not going to create the same sense of parity that we felt in spring in LCS just by removing teams. Like, that doesn't really happen. You'll still just end up with 2 or 3 teams that roster build or spend more money than the other teams and therefore perform at a much higher level. But the other teams are just as fun to watch, and you can still story build off of them, and you can still brand off of them, and I think LEC has actually done that better than LCS in terms of making every team feel valuable. Obviously, there are some exceptions. Like, I don't know anyone who's a Rogue fan right now. Like, I'm just gonna throw that out there. So that's like the low-hanging fruit. But in general, I feel like all of these teams have all the other teams have very distinct fan bases and identities when I watch their games, and it feels like, oh, I understand why you would be a fan of this team, and the broadcast does a good job of communicating it, and there is like an alive fan base, even for Giant X, which arguably is the other low-hanging fruit team that people seem to consistently dislike. So even for Giant X, I feel like they have a more defined fan base. So it's definitely, for me, I think it will probably be inevitable that LEC downsizes because I feel like Riot is going to globally downsize, and that's the direction that we're going in. But I don't think it's going to be something that will make the region overall more entertaining. But I also like watching group Nirvana, so I don't know if my opinion is valid.
Hey, I mean, the OMG TT qualifying match was interesting. We'll talk about that. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think about anything else on this. I'd say like the region that I know of, and I'm pretty sure I brought this up last week when we were talking about divorcing the ideas of viewership from the ideas of international performance, from the ideas of like team to team fandom, is that I think one region that's done super well in terms of focusing on player narratives and also focusing on team, like overall team narratives, and making sure that people are a fan of the region almost in a more insular way that doesn't have international expectations on it, is CBLOL. I've brought this up before, but it has the least amount of viewership drop off from the highest team to the lowest team. And it's something like, I want to say only, it's frustrating, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's between like 20 and like 60K, I think. And that is really small when you compare to viewership drop off when, for example, people have brought up when Uzi I retired, there was like a really large percentage drop off in viewership in LPL during that time frame just from his retirement. The difference in viewership and fandom from the high teams, like the most popular teams, to the lower teams is a massive. Like LCK in particular I'll say has an optic problem, and I'm talking about optic not in terms of League of Legends, but in terms of Call of Duty.
Oh wow,
Where
yeah, actually we're talking about that.
their,
Was like that was my first
their
thought.
their fan base is just eclipses everything else to the point where, like, if you have a match with them in it, and this may have changed a little bit with co-streaming, but I remember when I first started following it, not as a fan, but as someone who was actually covering it for ESPN, there was such a viewership gap when Optic was playing matches versus all other Call of Duty matches. And you see something very similar in LCK, even with a team like Gen G, who like is on a potentially historic run, regardless of KT, is an incredibly good team, has the best performing player in the world right now on it. And you still have T1 like eclipsing everything in terms of viewership and fan investment and stuff like that. Because of Faker, because of the legacy of the team, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think when you look at brand building and player building and like all that stuff, CBLOL is such a great case, but it's also such a remarkable outlier that I think more people should be studying it in terms of how that happened and like what the grassroots efforts were and how it tied into culturally the way that Brazilian fans interact with their teams and their players and stuff like that. And the really great job that team did, that the CBLOL team did in terms of presenting those player narratives and those team stories and stuff like that. It always felt whenever I was watching CBLOL, even back in like 2015, 2016, that the broadcast was focusing on all teams like pretty equally, even though Pain was obviously at that time the highest in terms of viewership and fan investment. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to watch as much CBLOL as I would have liked over the past, like, pretty much since joining the broadcast, but even before that. But it is
Get
impressive.
ready to watch more.
I know. It is impressive, but also an outlier when we look at how most people interact with, like, fans and teams, right? So in that way, I think more people should be studying like what happened, but also they're on a weird precipice right now as well because they're going to be losing with the new changes for teams. So yeah, it's I don't think ultimately bringing it back to the LEC topic, I don't think removing teams is going to help for a lot of reasons. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't have like a lot to add other than, a quip about if we dressed Faker up in a Martin the Warrior costume, we could market T1 as the red wall. And again, that's another reference that I think like 2 people will get. But anyway, we'll continue on. I think the one thing I would add is directly addressing the like quality of gameplay element. I actually think decreasing team numbers in the long run makes teams overall worse because it decreases your scrim pool also. Because it's like when you're like legitimately there's an issue in LCS right now where teams have way fewer scrim options and way fewer ability to scrim if one of their players becomes ill suddenly. That's been a big issue, and quality of scrims decreases more because of the lack of the academy system. Obviously, you could still scrim like NACL teams, right? But in general, their schedules can be a lot more volatile because a lot of them are working, a lot of them are doing other things, and you do have access to like some LATAM teams, but again, that's also slightly more variable and not something you can do as last minute. Whereas, like if you're cutting down on, I don't think LEC will almost never have this problem because of how robust the ERL system is, and I don't think that is going to change. But it's if you're an LEC team who believes that scrimming ERL teams is not as productive, which those do exist, you'll definitely be exposed to different meta reads, different play styles, all these things way less if the team number drops in LEC. So that's like another, because I think the big crux of the argument is the idea that play quality will increase, and I don't think that that is true, or even something that you can necessarily justify rationally. So yeah. Anyway, I think we are anti decrease LEC team stake, so pretty firmly.
I will say also the LCS has not reflected that either in terms of play quality. Like, even if you believe like top down from first to eighth that LCS is like quote unquote better, which I don't even think is necessarily true. I also think that we were just literally talking about how the difference in play between the top two teams and a lot of the field is really, really far apart. And since it's just a best of 3 single round robin, we don't get a lot of chances to see that change because every team only faces each other once.
Yep. All right. Well, that was our LEC topic because I don't think we really think MDK or BDS will do anything this week. So, yay.
We'll see. I'd love to be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. We could do a quick like how would they beat them experiment if we wanted. Just like a quick, short to the point go. How do yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for MDK, it's still tough. I mean, well, because I mean, like BDS, I feel like you could be like make the game super volatile, and then when Fnatic take these bad fights in mid to late, then BDS just pick a scaling comp that will outfight them. I still think Fnatic are going to win, but I think if BDS have like a route to beat them, that's probably the best option that I can see. MDK is really tough because I still think that this meta has been really rough for them. And I think G2, regardless of how shaky they looked in summer finals, are much more comfortable in it. Whereas I'm still looking at the way this team looks best is with Elioya interacting with his lanes really early instead of being on like full clear scaling picks for jungle. So I think my blueprint for MDK would just be like lock in something that you're really, really comfortable with, meta be damned, and just do it.
All right, for me,
I still see G2 Fnatic winning, so tough.
Sorry, I am randomly answering chat questions while talking. Anyway, we're talking about Jukes, which is a big throwback. He was a Brazilian top laner that C9 had.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
at
that.
the start, and he immediately got benched for Kumo because he wasn't performing that well, and I think the viewership increase on Academy specifically didn't really justify because it didn't really jump up that much because, again, like you will get Brazilian fans watching it, but not as much as if, say, he played LCS, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's definitely an experiment because I think that a lot of Brazilian fans are concerned with is that like LCS will mass import some of their favorite players. And I just think LCS GMs are crazy and will continue to import LCK players until there are none left. Anyway, and not actually think about the brand value or value the brand value of the Brazilian fan base, which is crazy because I don't know if we keep doing the same crazy shit and nothing changes, we may as well keep doing it. Anyway, Hi, I'm not salty. I will try to be less salty in the future. I got yelled at the second to last time I was on Hotline League for how salty I was, and Nero was also very salty. So it was a very salty episode, and fans were
It's
like,
a salt episode.
"Stop being salty." It's like, well, we both like NACL. What do you want from me? Anyway, hi. Continuing. Sorry, I'm really bad with the references today. They're just like terrible. BDS, I think BDS Fnatic is like reasonable. Like, I think one thing BDS has always been decent at, and is just like keeping map state stable in mid game. Like, that's like their best thing that they do. And Fnatic will do some dumb shit, so I think BDS win is like not the most crazy thing. Though I think is more likely, but I think it's likely, not exactly, but it's not terrible. Like, I'd get them like a 30%, which is pretty good. And then MDK G2, I think. Again, MDK, just like don't fight. It's the same. Just stop like doing the fighting thing. Try to like they're one of the teams that in spring, like at their peak, or I guess it was winter. In winter at like their peak, they could kind of go toe to toe with G2 and Macro. So I don't know if that's still there, then that's a thing. Especially since G2 have been a lot more variable in the early game, and maybe we just pull out some crazy early game strats and don't fight them and try to play the map, and maybe there's a chance. But I think that one's way less likely. So, yeah. But there's a way forward both times. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like not so crazy if something happens, but it because it's LEC where everyone beats everyone. Woo! Parody! Yay!
Yeah. Except it's best of fives.
Except it's best of fives, exactly. So
I do agree though that the higher like upset potential is definitely BDS beating Fnatic than MDK beating G2.
Do you agree with like my 30% or?
Yeah, I still think it's low. Like I said, I think you lock in something that has like really good 5v5 like scaling, and then you take the bad fights that Fnatic thinks they want but don't actually.
Yep. Well, the final topic we have on the agenda is LPL playoffs, which are going to be starting tonight. And I haven't done my ranking stream yet because God bless the internet. But the
internet's been scuffing you all week. Wow.
Yeah, it's great. I was supposed to do that this morning, but it was still out after yesterday. So it was like coincidentally came back on an hour before this stream. So we're good.
Oh. It was like not fuck over making rounds
2 days in a row, yeah. But I have made another bracket thing, aka I've taken Miracu's work and copied it and changed the team names. So there is a new bracket. We will distribute it to fans. Making the rounds. If you would like to, remember to not be a dick, copy the template, and only change the team name. So if you would like to make a bracket entry for making the rounds, I still don't know who the winner was of the MSI bracket. That person just never appeared again to claim their prize, and I still owe Shanatonin a stream appearance where he does a VOD review. So that'll be fun. For the LPL Spring one, but you can have various, if you have a prize idea, I just gave you credit, Miracu. What do you want from me? Anyway, if you would like a prize of some kind for having the highest score on the bracket prediction, feel free to fill one out, copy the template page, and put your name on it. Hopefully a name that you use in Twitch chat so I know who you are.
Yeah, we can identify you.
And then that's where we are now. I will have mine filled out for probably the stream, but we can at least talk about like some of the upcoming matches if we don't want to fill the whole thing out right now. It's kind of up to how much stamina we have for this kind of nonsense. But For me, I think like first round, LGD Nip is kind of a banger. I'm not gonna lie, especially since
the rematch.
Yeah, especially since it's a rematch, and then we also had LGD drop 2 games to IG, which is pretty fantastic. Also, I put Meteor on my All Pro Jungle list, which probably is a surprise of many people. So,
I think for me, the question is: have NIP like actually received some sort of like mental reset after this RA series, right? Because going into the RA series, I tentatively picked NIP, but I was like, they could just be mental boom and like, completely bomb out because they've looked that bad and that uncoordinated. And then they came out and like stomped RA pretty handily. So I still think, based on their recent matches, NIP should win the rematch. I also thought NIP would take it initially in the groups, and they did not. Yeah, I'm going to tentatively favor NIP again, and hope not to regret it. I don't know why. I guess my ultimate thing is like Rookie, even though he's not having the best performances, just dragging them across the series. But yeah, I mean, God, even in the RA series, they had some weird fights, some weird setups.
I actually thought RA would win that. Clearly, I was wrong. Very wrong. But I still have like no faith in NIP. I think when we're talking about mid-game macro, I think someone made the joke like KT mid-game macro better than NIP because I flamed the shit out of NIP mid-game macro, I think, the last stream.
I mean, I would actually agree with that. I would have agreed with it even before. Yeah,
I think we rated KT over NIP, didn't we? Well, you didn't because you were putting them last.
I'm a KT hater, but yeah, we said Carmine Core clears all because they're
yeah. Except for T1, I guess we said T1 wins over Carmine Corp. I think, and I had KT over Carmine Corp as well.
You're the biggest KT glazer.
Oh yeah, here. Absolutely. But yeah, I'm gonna go with LGD. I think like the way LGD have played around jungle has been good enough that NIP are still really rusty at it, and it's not working well for them. And Rookie's map pressure is very inconsistent. I think honestly, you could probably just dismantle Rookie with Illusion Ban at this point. Though they might not because he has gotten caught on Lucian many times. Also for context, I'm probably one of the biggest Rookie defenders in the history of mankind. This is probably the first split I haven't put him on my all-pro list, so yeah, banger. But I'm gonna go LGD with this one. In terms of FPX TT, ooh, this one's fun too, actually. I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of fun. Not bad.
This one is interesting. I thought, so even though we just seen, this was another matchup that we'd like just seen. I thought that I had picked TT because I'm just like, I think they actually, with all of their faults, have looked stronger in this meta. Partially because UCal just keeps spamming Lucian and Zeri, and also partially because of their bot lane. And I don't know, man. I feel like they weirdly look more comfortable right now than FPX.
I actually
in terms of current meta.
I also have TT. I think I'm just super high on 1xn. It's possible that if you ban Ezreal, they can't do anything because 1xn is like very good at self-peeling, and that's part of his value in the context of this Trainwreck team. But I mean, if they win this series, then I have to drop the. I have to let Miracu drop the Velvet coffee pasta in chat. So I don't know how I feel about that one.
Oh wow, curse!
As the bet was if TT win a playoff series, and yeah, then Miracu gets to drop the Velvet coffee pasta. So fun. But I actually think they probably win. I agree with you. And then we can talk about so you would have JDG NIP, and I would have JDG LGD. Is it safe to say we both think JDG would win that one?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's like, even with, yes, I know JG are not looking as good. Yagao sucks, whatever people are saying about JG. I think they easily clear both of these teams.
Yeah. I think similarly for anyone's legend, it's probably also true. Like, I think, much like many LPL playoffs rounds, it is very unlikely for round one teams to do anything. That's been like the idea of this 10-team Giga bracket has always been like more exciting than it actually is because the first round teams are usually very sus. So, yay. Pog.
And usually whoever makes it through is then smacked down by like the actual better teams in round 2 or round 3 if there's like
more runway, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's so I don't know. Maybe like the first rounds are the most exciting for a couple, at least a few days, you know. Like TSAL's not that fun. Weibo JDG. Actually, Weibo JDG is interesting.
Yeah, I think TES beats the AL pretty handily. Weibo JDG. Man, the Weibo revival is happening once again, and I do not like it. I mean, I still favor JDG in that.
I'm just so suspicious of Weibo, but also it's like, is it fair to say this game may depend on who gets Italy series?
Yes, unironically, which is like
actually is a thing.
I think so I'll say this: these are two junglers that are like very comfortable in the full clear meta. And I think like in addition to Xiaohu performing better, and I think the roster changes that Weibo made, in particular, Tarzan in this current meta it suits him very well. So it makes sense that they look better post roster move. But similarly, I think Kanavi looks really good in this meta as well. I think top to bottom, JDG are a better team.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I
don't know. I think Sheer is good, but it's just still like he's very limited effectiveness, and I actually think Breeze has had a really good split. Kanavi's better. I actually had Yagao on my All Pro. I actually think Yagao's had a really good split. I think the saving grace of this team is Kanavi and Yagao, and the rest is like they're kind of there.
Rulers have a down split.
Yeah.
I agree with the Sheer Breathe matchup, but I just think like, again, if I'm looking at current meta, provided that, again, I don't know what patch they're going to be on, but if it doesn't change and it continues to, which even if the meta shifts away from like complete double 80 comps, I still think that because of jungle XP, full clear junglers will still be rewarded more than the typical LPL jungle style, which we've talked about, which is more lane like interacting with lane focus, like skipping camps to get your lanes ahead, that kind of stuff. And I think Kanavi wins out, in my opinion, over Tarzan in that regard. Like, it's weird. I'm looking at mid jungle kind of as a unit, but also them not playing as a unit, if that makes sense. And I think JDG do win out in that.
And if you look at top to bottom analysis, Breathe has been performing better than Sheer. I would say Kanavi and Gao is a better mid jungle, and unfortunately, both of their bottom lanes have not had a great, have like really underperformed relative to their reputations, right? So it's definitely like I do like the idea that this is very much a mid jungle matchup. I think that's kind of fun. Because obviously top lane is fake. Oh, that's funny because my season MVP was Bin for the split. So yeah.
Hey, they can always throw Flandre in there, right? If they want.
I also think I guess like my other take on the bracket is I think it's unfortunate that BLG is on one side and then TS LNG are on the same side. It's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah.
I think it's just like BLG kind of get a free pass to semis. But I don't know. Maybe the weebs take it. Who can say? But for now, I'm saying BLG get a free pass to semis.
Yeah, I think it's still, even with LNG looking better, I still think it's TES BLG in the upper bracket semifinal.
Yeah, I think LNG would have a better shot against BLG than TS. But yeah. LNG have, they've been the god killers this split, so we can say.
True.
Banger. Anyway, I think we'll save kind of the rest for next week. But everyone get your brackets in so that your points count tonight. I'll post it on the Twitters and we'll talk about it for stream viewers tonight before the LGD series, which will be super fun. I am excited. There was one question I wanted to get to that was from a YouTube comment from last week, which was, do you think that because it was when we talked about teams throwing, they asked if we think that ADC mid meta has contributed to games being like more throwable.
Ooh, interesting.
It's an interesting question, so yeah.
In terms of games being more throwable, it does depend on composition. If you're looking at this current meta, though, I think you are seeing a convergence of a lot of things that's leading to games coming down to mid to late game team fight wins. Part of it is because teams mid to late game macro might just be bad and they don't know what to do outside of, if there's a neutral objective set up, we need to set up for a 5v5 there. But one thing that double AD comps contribute to, especially with something like a jungle Ivern, I'd slot Maokai into here too, but like I'm thinking Ivern in particular because Ivern just offers so much to double AD comps. Is that when you get these like massive 5v5 fights, there's just a fuck ton of damage that's being done in every single fight. And that does mean that if one team, even if they're ahead, ends up getting wiped in like a mid to late game team fight, the game might be so, like, it might be 20 plus minutes in where you can get a lot from a fight like that in terms of standing gold and map pressure. But I think it's like, it's it's weirdly more than that. It's a lot of other stuff that's contributing to what has made double 80 comps good in the first place, which is Faded Ashes, AP jungle, like buffs, even with the nerfs that have come down successively. And then additionally, just jungle XP, which I feel like you and I have talked about ad nauseum in terms of it being one of the most impactful changes to the meta in the summer. And that was back on 14.
I don't know.
What?
The
11?
preseason
12?
patch for the summer
Yeah.
split.
Yeah. But I think that is also more impactful, and why you're seeing, if teams do not have a good understanding of mid-game macro, it will come down to 5v5 fights, and then with a lot of these comps, there's just a lot of damage being done. And so if a team that's not ahead ends up winning, it can be more frustrating. I still need to workshop with Liam that throw to close ratio. But in summary, I think it's partially double 80 comps, but that's not the whole story. And a lot of meta things that have made 80 comps successful are a part of it.
Yeah, I think anytime you're like drastically shifting how you play jungle because of jungle XP values, which happens once a year, it feels like
at least.
Like you drastically go, like the jungle XP values go from, okay, we're playing around jungle to we're playing around lanes, which drastically changes how you approach the game. So whenever you're doing that, your laners have to think more critically about wave management. If you're playing more towards around jungle, and if you're not like as comfortable doing it, there will be a lot more times where you get random ganks that aren't supposed to happen because the jungle should be farming, or you get situations where the jungle location isn't communicated because we're microing our camps. That doesn't actually happen, but it's a joke. Anyway, we just anything like adjacent to that, right? And I think that's probably contributing more to if it feels like there's more throws. I don't know if there's actually more throws. I feel like throws have just been a part of the fabric of League existence since the dawn of time, which is why it's still very funny to me that people freak out when there are massive throws. Someone else made a YouTube comment along the lines of, League has been playing for 13 years and it's crazy when we're doing throws in 2024. And it's like, well, we did throws in 2023 too, so it's fine.
Also kind of like, if we didn't have throws, like yes, I know a lot of this is coming off of like negative sentiment around the summer finals of LEC, right? But like throws are what make it interesting as well. Like if there wasn't these kind of massive game swings, then people would be really, really mad. I also think like, so right now I'm just as a thing, I'm scrolling through our Slack chat where our graphics person posts the post-game breakdowns, and I usually download them, but I just wanted to like scroll through to take a look at the gold graphs. And a lot of these gold graphs are not throws, right? Like it's just a steady win from, and this is obviously just LCS. I just wanted a quick look at the visuals. But like the closest games, over the past 2 weeks, the TLC9 game 1 has a really, really swingy gold graph. C9 TL game 3 has a gold graph where like C9 are kind of a bit ahead, and then all of a sudden TL take over the game. But that's not a throw by C9. It's just like TL playing within a really close margin for most of the game and then having better macro and setups and keeping C9 from snowballing their lead really early. And then you get into the actual, like, quote unquote throws, Fly versus SR, where if you look at the actual gold graph, SR did not have that much of a lead. The perception was that they had a big lead, but like we talked about already, FlyQuest kept things really, really close. And then the game SR won, they were fully in control. And then the game FlyQuest won, they were pretty fully in control. TLC9 game 2, they were fully in control. I'm sure people are already getting bored by me talking about this, but like 100 Thieves IMT is one of the ones where you can see the visible throw because the tiny little tail of 100 Thieves taking over the game is like really small and just a blip at the very end where they cross into a gold lead after IMT has controlled the game from about 20 minutes to like 45 minutes. Right before the game ends, you also have the NRG Dig game 1 and the C9 NRG game 1, where there again is a tiny tail at the end with Dig and C9 overtaking NRG when NRG had control most of the game. So like even the actual gold graphs I'm looking at right now, just over the past 2 weeks and just LCS, a lot of them are not throws. There are like 3 very specific throws, but everything else is like pretty clear. Even that C9 TL game 1 where you're like TL threw off of this decision they made to either not close the game or to like go to a specific objective first, and like they wasted time like here. That's not what I would consider a throw, especially in a game that was that close for most of the game, right? So I'll also bring that up too. I think people's perception of throws are, again, I talked about this in relation to when the actual 5v5 fight happens to enemy team closing. And when that time margin becomes smaller, I think it's more and more frustrating. And then the LEC and the G2 Fnatic series that we had 2 weeks ago at this point, that time got shorter and shorter. So it was just like Fnatic throwing more and more, obviously, which can be very frustrating to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is, like, Riot kind of goes back and forth on whether or not they want the games to be more back and forth or not, because, like, from a game design perspective, it feels really bad to sit in a game for 40 minutes where it feels like you can't do anything.
Yep.
And I think this is mitigated a lot by solo queue, because obviously a lot of people FF'd earlier, but also a lot of solo queue games, contrary to what your gold teammates are telling you, are winnable from a deficit much more than pro play, arguably. But because of just like coordination and more random events. But so that's probably why like pro will necessarily seem more stable, and maybe the balance will seem better because as long as it's fine in solo queue, it's fine. But there are still mechanics that are baked into the game that allow comebacks, like bounties and dragons and barons, right? All of these things exist as mechanics to make the game feel interactable even though you are behind. So the game is designed with the idea that throws or comebacks will occur with a relative level of frequency. So there's not going to be, even in pro play, ever a time where the games are always just one-sided, closed out, because if that happened, Riot would intervene and add more comeback mechanics, like rubber banding for junglers, and more value, like higher scalability on the dragons, so that the later ones are impactful, like things like this that can be added. So, definitely. Also, they killed the level scaling on Smite. That was a huge one that was relatively recent as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of, like, the game is supposed to be like that, to an extent. Obviously, again, it feels bad if You can build by the same side of the token, it feels really bad if you can build a massive league, and it doesn't seem to matter because the late game dragons are so overpowered, right? So there's a lot of balance that goes into player experience. But again, games are supposed to feel like you can come back, right? So it's not necessarily a sign of terrible play if comebacks occur, though I think most of us would agree that the Fnatic series was not well played by Fnatic.
No. It was not. This is not a defense of that series.
Yeah, it's just that, again, throws should happen in general. So, yeah, I think that's the main one. Miracu would like you to !Emily Rand in chat again because he has updated the command again.
Well, what curse thing is this now? Is it just my name, no space?
Yeah.
I see in chat already I hope Emily pulls the Loyan pairing, and I'm not sure if I want to be able to see this. Oh, I cannot access. Someone else do it for me. I forgot. My account's kind of borked. I need to update my email, and I can't access the email, so. Oh, nice! Leaving the Diana ship. Let's go. That's a good one.
So,
creating the ultimate eclipse of pure love. Who wrote these?
The bot. But basically,
the standard pairing. Wait, who is Loyan paired with? Do I want to know?
I can spoil it for you. It's a plushie.
oh, of course. I should have known.
Yeah. But basically, we asked the Kelsey AI written bot, which champions in the league are lesbians, and we made pairings out of those. So some of those, like Leona, Diana, you've got Vi, Kaylin, you've got your what it was before, Spellbeth, Kaisa. And then, for some reason, the bot thought that Nasus and Renekton were lesbians. So
sure,
whatever. So they're in there, and then we added. I guess Miracu decided we add Loyan into plushie. So
Loyan and plushie, nice. I hope I'll get that one in the future.
It's excellent. So
I love this for me.
Oh,
there we go.
There it is.
They're one of the softest ships. Interesting.
Very fun.
That's a good place to end.
I won the gacha. Okay. Anyway, thanks as always for watching. If you're watching on YouTube and Spotify, please follow. If you have not subscribed to Ko-fi, you can do for a very low price to support making the rounds. Just helps us make this a more sustainable practice because it does take time for me to edit and for us to watch and talk about VODs. Obviously, she gets paid to do that. I just do that. But so that makes it a lot.
I don't get paid to
more reasonable
watch anything, but I'll see.
Yeah, but in theory, it makes you better at your job if you watch other
True.
things. In theory, who knows? Hard to say.
I don't know if it's in practice.
Don't bang your head against the wall. Anyway, under the throwback.
It's a lamp.
What's a lamp?
Very cute. It's a lamp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not a vase, but it is like a lamp mounted on a vase. Yeah.
Yep, it's chill. So, yep. Anyway, I think UM is still on, or EMEA Masters. There you go. It's still on. If so, you guys can go find a stream and watch that, and we'll talk to you next week.